Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into some serious philosophical territory? We're tackling Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged.
Oh yeah, we're going deep this time, focusing specifically on part 3, where the real mystery of Atlas Shrugged unfolds. Galt's Gulch. Here we come.
Now, we both know this is no small undertaking. This book, it sparked, what, decades of debate? But today, we're zeroing in on that pivotal moment when the why behind all those disappearances finally comes to light.
It's in part 3 where Rand really pulls back the curtain.
Yeah.
We finally get to see the why behind those vanishing acts that have been haunting us from the beginning.
And to really get the full impact of Galt's Gulch, we have to first understand the woman who stumbles upon it.
Dagny Taggart.
Dagny. Now, there's a force of nature, if I've ever seen one, battling to keep her railroad alive, clinging to reason in a world that seems dead set on abandoning it.
You hit the nail on the head. She's a builder, a doer. She's got this unwavering moral compass, and she's not afraid to follow it no matter where it leads.
Absolutely. And it's that relentless pursuit of truth, that drive to uncover the mystery of John Galt's disappearance, that ultimately leads her to this hidden valley.
Just imagine it for a second, She's been navigating a world on the brink of collapse, and then bam! She stumbles into this haven of, well, you could almost call it a gleaming testament to human potential.
Talk about a stark contrast. Galt's Gulch compared to the decaying world outside. I mean, it's almost like stepping onto another planet. But this utopia, and Rand makes it very clear, is a utopia, isn't built on magic, is it? There are some very specific and maybe controversial principles at work here.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just some happy accident. You're right. Galt's Gulch is the embodiment of Rand's ideal society in action.
So let's dig into that a bit. What sets this society apart? What are the core values that make Galt's Gulch tick while the outside world crumbles?
Well, for one, individual achievement is the ultimate currency here. It's a world free from the shackles of, well, she calls it forced altruism. That seems to be strangling the outside world. And it's fascinating to see how the characters we've come to know transform in this new environment.
Oh, absolutely. Like Ellis Wyatt, the oil tycoon. He's not driven by profit in Galt's Gulch, is he? It's the joy of creation, the satisfaction of seeing his work put to use for the benefit of those he values.
Precisely. And remember Richard Halley, the composer. He went practically silent in the outside world. But in Galt's Gulch, he says, and this line always gets me, he says, "I came here to hear my music." He chose silence over having his art exploited.
Powerful. And in Galt's Gulch, his music is finally appreciated for what it is. Not twisted, not used, just purely appreciated.
It's about respecting the integrity of creation, right? And then there's Francisco d'Anconia, the supposed playboy,
right?
Squandering his fortune. But it was all an act, a calculated rebellion against a system that seemed to punish success.
So in Galt's Gulch, he can finally be his true self.
Exactly. A brilliant, driven industrialist, no longer forced to apologize for his talents.
I love how each resident's story, their individual journey, feeds into this core idea. They're not running away from responsibility. They're embracing a different kind of responsibility, one based on their own individual merit, the freedom to pursue their own vision of happiness.
And that brings us to, dare I say, the love triangle.
Oh, here we go. Dagny, John Galt, and Francisco. Talk about a tangled web of emotions. Francisco's confession of love to Dagny, it's heartbreaking, yet somehow empowering at the same time, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. He says, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, he says something like, "Dagny, I've always loved you, and the fact that I deserted you, that was my love."
You know, even love in Rand's world is fascinatingly complex. It's not just a whirlwind of emotions. It's a choice, a conscious alignment of values. Have you noticed that?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing something in the other person that resonates with your own values, a mutual respect for each other's strength and independence.
Okay, so we've got this incredible setting, these compelling characters, but let's be honest, the real meat of Atlas Shrugged, the thing that's fueled countless debates, is the philosophy at its core.
John Galt's philosophy.
Exactly. It's intense stuff, but Rand, she's a master at weaving these really complex ideas into a story that keeps you turning pages.
It's in Galt's speech, the one where she lays it all out. Objectivism, the whole blueprint. It's a manifesto, really. A manifesto for reason.
And that's where we get that famous line, A is A. Existence is identity. Consciousness is identification. It sounds deceptively simple, but it's actually incredibly profound. What's your take on that?
Right. It sounds so simple, but she's using it to underpin this whole worldview. the irrefutable nature of reality.
Mm.
Her heroes, they cling to this while the world outside crumbles under contradictions.
And that's where she really flips the script, doesn't she? On conventional morality, I mean, this idea that sacrifice, altruism, collectivism, these things are inherently good. Rand challenges that.
She does. She says these principles, taken to an extreme, they can actually be incredibly destructive to the individual. They lead to a society where mediocrity is rewarded and achievement is punished.
That's where this whole idea of the looters versus the producers comes into play. Tell me more about this.
Okay, so imagine the looters as they're the takers, right? Driven by envy, entitlement. They demand what others have earned. The producers, on the other hand, they're the creators, the innovators, the ones who build, who strive, who achieve.
So essentially, the looters feed off the producers, draining their energy, their creativity, holding them back from reaching their full potential.
Exactly. And this is where the tension really starts to build. It's not just a philosophical debate anymore.
Right.
The outside world, with its looter mentality, it's literally falling apart. Think about that scene with the breaking copper wire in Minnesota.
Chills. Every time.
It's not just a wire snapping. It's a symbol. This whole system, it's on the verge of collapse. And that's where we'll pick up next time. Because when this crumbling world collides with the utopia of Galt's Gulch, that's where things get really interesting.
You know, it's almost like watching a train wreck in slow motion. The outside world, they're clinging to this ideology that's clearly crumbling around them.
They created the problem, and now they're drawn to the solution.
But they despise everything Galt's Gulch represents. It's this haven of individualism, of self-reliance. And yet they're desperate, right, for a solution to the chaos they created.
Exactly. They want to control the very people they've shunned, the people who embody the principles they've rejected. And it all starts with John Galt himself.
It's like trying to put a leash on a force of nature. They kidnap Galt. They think they can force him to fix everything, to wave his magic wand and make their problems disappear.
But see, that's where they miss the point entirely. They fundamentally misunderstand who John Galt is, what he represents.
They think he wants to rule, don't they? To impose his will, to be in control.
They're so used to thinking in terms of power, of coercion. They can't fathom that Galt understands true power comes from creation, from living by a consistent set of principles.
And that's where we get that electrifying line, our work or your guns. Talk about a line that sends chills down your spine.
Right. It's not a negotiation. It's a declaration of independence. It's that moment where these two worldviews collide head on.
You can almost feel the ground shift, can't you? Galt is drawing a line in the sand. He's saying, look, you can't have it both ways. You can't destroy the individual and then demand the fruits of their labor.
It's a powerful indictment of hypocrisy, don't you think? And a rallying cry for anyone who's ever felt stifled, controlled, held back by a system that doesn't value their individuality.
And what's interesting is that even as he rejects their demands, Galt still offers them a choice.
He does.
He doesn't try to force his philosophy down their throats. He simply asks that one powerful question, the question that echoes throughout the entire novel. Are you listening, John Galt?
And that, I think, is the genius of Rand's writing. She doesn't just preach, she provokes. She forces you, the reader, to confront these questions yourself.
Exactly. It's not enough to just passively read the story. She wants you to look inward, to examine your own beliefs, your own choices, and to ask yourself, where do I stand in all of this?
Right. Am I on the side of the looters demanding what I haven't earned? Or am I a producer, someone who values individual achievement, who understands that true freedom comes with responsibility?
And those aren't just abstract questions, are they?
No, they're not.
I mean, they might play out on an epic scale in Atlas Shrugged, but these are questions that resonate in our everyday lives, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Every day, we're faced with choices, big and small. And those choices, they reflect our values. They shape the world around us.
It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, to feel like our individual actions don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But Atlas Shrugged, it reminds us that every choice we make, every action we take, it creates a ripple effect.
And that's where we really get to the heart of what makes Atlas Shrugged such a powerful and, let's be honest, sometimes controversial work of literature.
It's not about easy answers, is it?
No, not at all. It's about asking difficult questions, challenging us to think critically about things like morality, the role of government, the very nature of success and happiness.
It's a deep dive into the human spirit, both its incredible potential and its capacity for, well, let's just say destruction.
Exactly. And on that note, I'm curious, as we move into the final part of our deep dive, what's been your biggest takeaway from all of this? What's resonated with you the most? It really makes you think, doesn't it? Are we listening? Not just to John Galt, but to that voice inside ourselves, that voice that yearns to create, to build, to make a difference in the world.
It's like Rand is holding up this mirror, right, to society, sure, but also to each of us individually, challenging us to confront not just the state of the world, but our own role in it. And I think it's easy in the daily grind to lose sight of that bigger picture, to feel like our individual actions are just a drop in the ocean.
It's easy to fall into that trap, absolutely. But that's where Atlas Shrugged really packs a punch, I think. It reminds us that every choice matters. Each decision sends out these ripples, and those ripples, they can have a far greater impact than we realize.
Absolutely. And that brings us to this interesting crossroads because on the one hand, Rand's philosophy, it's incredibly empowering.
It is.
It reminds us we have a choice. We have agency. We have the power to shape our own lives, our own destinies. But it also places this huge responsibility on our shoulders.
Exactly. It's a call to action. It's that little nudge, to step up, to take ownership, to say, okay, I have a part to play in this. But it doesn't offer any easy answers, does it?
That's what I love about it. It's not a blueprint. It's more like a challenge, a provocation.
Right. Like, okay, you've seen what's possible. Now go out there and make it happen. But in the real world, not everyone can just disappear to a hidden valley and start a utopia, right? So how do we take these ideas, these principles, and put them into practice? In our own lives, our own work?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think there's a single answer that's going to work for everyone. But I do think Atlas Shrugged gives us a framework for thinking.
A starting point.
Exactly. It encourages us to define our own values, to figure out what we stand for, and then to stand up for it even when it's hard, even when we face resistance.
It's about having the courage to be the Dagny Taggart of our own lives, right? To embrace that relentless pursuit of what we believe in, even when the world tells us to give up.
Thinking about all the Dagny Taggarts and Hank Reardons out there, those who are building, creating, innovating, pushing boundaries, they might not always get the recognition they deserve, but they keep going, don't they? Driven by that inner spark.
Because ultimately, it's about more than just success, isn't it? It's about living a life that's true to yourself, true to your values, to create something, to contribute something, to leave the world a little bit better than you found it. And I think that's a message that resonates deeply, even decades after Atlas Shrugged was first published.
It's a message that feels incredibly timely, even today. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Atlas Shrugged, I want to leave you with this. You've visited Galt's Gulch. You've grappled with some challenging ideas. Now go out there and make your own mark on the world. Thanks for joining us.